guys, this is Lala Legacy and welcome back to another episode of SeaBed. So, let's jump right back in. I remembered a TV program where they carried out an experiment by submerging a water bottle and a ball in the sea. Both ended up crushed by water pressure. I felt as though the darkness was seeping into me through my eyes and skin. It was slowing my pace. I feared it might immobilize me completely. I continued pressing forward with all my strength when an image appeared in the darkness. I turned my face away and closed my eyes to let it pass. However, the image wasn't created by the light, but my own mind. I could hear the cry of cicadas around me. There was a small mountain of sand piled up in the middle of the sandbox with a tunnel passing right through it. Countless water canals surrounded it on all sides. Finishing her masterpiece, Takako stood up and shook the sand off her hands. She turned to the water supply Sachiko was sitting in front of. Sachiko had a doll and a towel in her hands. "What are you doing?" She was wiping the doll's face with a wet towel. Her face got dirty. "Did you get it off?" "It's not working." There were some visible brown stains on the face of Sachiko's doll. "Let's ask the nurse." "Nurse!" Takako let out a loud shout. What happened? A young woman who had been tidying up the toys scattered inside the building turned to Takako with a yellow toy car in hand. "The doll got dirty. Can you get it cleaned up?" The somewhat feisty-looking woman approached them and looked at Sachiko's doll over Takako's head. "This looks like a stain. I guess it'd be possible to wash it out if you undid the sewing, but then it might actually fall apart." Sachiko's fingers clutched the doll tighter. "You can't fix it?" "I don't think it's worth the risk." Sachiko considered the doll's face for a long while. "Make sure to take care of her if you want to keep playing with her." The nurse gently patted Sachiko's head a few times. Aww. Memories were leaking forth from the deepest corner of my mind, from the very boundary of the conscious and subconscious. As the vision paused, I instead focused my senses on my limbs. I balled my hand into a fist with all my strength, successfully swaying my consciousness away from that memory. With that, I once again returned to the pitch-black darkness. It seemed I had stopped before I realized. I didn't know how long I was lost in that memory. When I resumed walking, I couldn't even tell if I was really moving or not. Before long, I could no longer sense my body at all. "Well now," I said, unable to tell if I was really hearing my own words or if they came from some distant memory again. It felt as though my arms and legs had melted into the darkness. Perhaps I had returned to being just a doll, like in those memories. I inhaled a deep breath, then slowly let it out. I remembered how I talked to Sachiko just earlier. She said it was odd to see me and Takako together. In that moment, I felt something different about her. Her expressions and body language seemed to have grown richer. However, I couldn't tell what that meant. I wondered if I should tell her, but in the end I decided not to. The lighter's light had been flickering in front of Sachiko's eyes. And from her perspective, I should have been sitting right beyond it. Ever so faintly, feeling returned to the tip of my toes and fingers. I calculated where my head was supposed to be from their position and fixed my eyes on the darkness. It was the real thing, complete darkness that melted the consciousness away. A phenomenon very similar to death. With some feeling having returned to my fingers, I began rhythmically moving them in an attempt to hypnotize myself. My legs moved unconsciously. My eyes could have seen anything. but my heart wouldn't move. All sorts of images appeared in front of my eyes. Nonetheless, my legs pushed me ever onwards. Sachiko took a box off the top shelf of the closet, checking what was inside, then returned it to the same place. There were 2 more boxes in the closet. They had Takako's written on them in big letters. Sachiko pulled the biggest box into the room and looked at the many other boxes she had collected. There were already 2 transparent containers in front of the closet. She moved one of them with her leg and placed the box beside it. Inside the box there were carving knives, a flute, a knitting set, and all sorts of trinkets that Takako probably used back in school. Sachiko took them out of the box one by one, separating them into 2 categories, or each item into 2 categories, important things and trash. She crushed the paper bag that was mixed with the other articles and put it into the trash container. There was a radio cassette player underneath it. She plugged it into the electrical socket and flipped its switch. A familiar melody filled the cold, gloomy room through the static. Sachiko turned around and looked at the bed. A doll she had left on the edge had fallen down to the floor. Sachiko reached out and picked it up. Its lips had frozen into a perpetual, almost confrontational smile. Its somewhat sardonic expression as it looked over the room made the doll appear almost like it was eager to ask a question or two. "This too brings back memories, but I was looking for something else," said Sachiko as she turned the cassette player off. The melody stopped, and the cold, gloomy room once again fell into silence. Sachiko took out a blue, rectangle-shaped can from another box. There were several radio cassettes inside. Back in middle school, Takako recorded her own radio show onto a cassette. I wonder which one it was. I believe it should have a yellow tape. Sachiko took out a yellow cassette tape from the can and pushed it into the player. The cassette holder sounded a rusty yet vigorous click. Sachiko put her finger on the play button, hesitated for a few moments, then pressed it. An old pop song began playing from the player. As the song ended, Takako's voice suddenly rang out through the static. She said it was the first song she'd ever bought. Then she said it was her first recording and congratulated herself. Her show was basically her talking about her day and introducing music she liked. There were no guest corners or letter reading sessions, of course. I tried listening to a radio show at night, but it was much more fun than I had expected. Oh, whoops. This is Sachiko, sorry. When I told Takako about it, she brought this tape to school the next day. She said it was really weird to hear her own voice coming through the recorder, and that she now wanted to learn how to sing or something. Sachiko smiled. She then continued to talk about the history of the old cassette player. It used to be in Takako's house, and the 2 listened to the radio and the cassettes they bought. Sachiko paused and listened to the song Takako had introduced. She then began talking again. She shared her personal information with an almost gleeful expression. Sachiko continued listening to the tape with the doll in her lap. Before I realized it, she had closed her eyes. I couldn't tell if she was sleeping or just absorbed in the music. The tape suddenly stopped in the middle of Takako's speech. Sachiko opened her eyes and took the tape out. She flipped it around, put it back into the holder, and pressed the play button. Now that I think about it, we dropped by Takako's old house some time after getting our first jobs, but this cassette player was no longer there by that time. It's not like we would have listened to it anyway, but... She faced the doll, but her eyes were gazing somewhere far away. She seemed to have been wondering why they weren't listening to music. If I could go back in time, I'd love to show her some better songs. Sachiko stood up and picked up the cassette player with one hand while holding the doll in the other. She then walked over to the bed. She sat down on its edge, placing the player on the side table and the doll by her pillow. Sachiko turned around and saw Takako on the bed. She extended her hand and touched her. I'll play my favorite song next. I'll play my favorite song next. A very old Western song came to life through the speakers. I looked up the meaning of the lyrics. Everything has a meaning. Even if I don't have them now, time will bring me the answers. This is my favorite song. I don't know why, but I really like it. I hope I'll eventually come to understand why. What an idiot, Sachiko murmured. Nonetheless, she made a smile. Perhaps she recalled a time when they listened to that song together. Takako said it'd be the last song for the day, then began playing. As the song came to an end and the tape stopped, the room fell completely silent. Sachiko realized that her doorbell was ringing. She didn't know whether she had fallen asleep or was simply too deep in thought by the time she glanced at the clock. But by the time she glanced at the clock, it was already midnight. Still, the doorbell was definitely ringing. Sachiko noticed the light coming from one of the rooms. She went to bed before sunset, so there was no way she turned on any of the lights. She glanced at the doll by the pillow and embraced it. She listened to the sound in her bitterly cold bed. The sound of the doorbell seemed to have grown distant. What am I supposed to do? I could have sworn she said something. However, both her words and the doorbell became barely audible to me. It felt as though everything I observed was happening somewhere far away in another world. I stepped on something and almost tripped. It felt softer than the rocky ground I'd been walking on so far. Upon kicking it, I heard a wooden thump. I prodded it a few times with my toes, making it quiver. The quivering extended across the entire cave, turning into rumbling. Two bright lights lit up as it traveled through the area. I looked down to see train tracks below my feet. I shaded my eyes with my hand and looked around, eventually spotting a hole in the wall. I stepped into the hole just moments before the giant object with headlights zoomed past me, the light from its windows flickering in the darkness. I couldn't make out any human-shaped silhouettes beyond said windows, though. After the train had passed, I climbed out of the hole and brushed the dust off my clothes. Looking in the direction the train went, I could see the lights of the outside world. I followed the train tracks outside, eventually emerging into a forest covered by fog. The moon perched in the dark blue sky right above the mountains and trees. I didn't know what time it was. Following the now abandoned railway line, I eventually made out the roof of the mansion looming beyond the trees. The familiar pathway led me back to the Western-style mansion I knew so well. As I emerged on the road leading to the library, I took a turn to the entrance of the mansion's inner yard. The doors weren't locked. I turned the doorknob and silently stepped inside. The lights weren't on in the corridor leading to the lobby, so I couldn't see very far. Making my way down the corridor, I managed to reach the lobby. A grandfather clock towered to my right. Its arrows displayed the time as 4 o'clock. Thinking about how much time I had until sunrise, I was just about to ascend the stairway when I noticed the silhouette of someone behind the counter. Good evening. The silhouette addressed me in Lily's voice. Good evening. Nana was really worried when you didn't show up for dinner. With no moonlight, it was darker inside the lobby than outside. As a result, even though my eyes had grown used to the dark outside, I still couldn't make her out very well in the room. I couldn't tell what kind of expression she wore, but despite the reprimanding content of her words, I felt a gentle and caring air from her. I made a sour face. I felt like a kid that broke her curfew. I'm sorry. Lily turned to the side and made a light yawn. Have you been waiting for me here all this time? Lily slowly shook her head. I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to simply kill some time here. I wonder if I'm getting old. Whenever this happens, I usually come here to think. Still, I did have a feeling you'd come back, so that was part of the reason too. What do you normally think about here? All sorts of things. Lily didn't say anything else. She must have fallen deep in thought. Her whisper reached my ears even from this distance. However, compared to that whisper, some of her previous words would pass by me and go too far, or wouldn't reach me properly. She appeared to have been testing how low her voice could go with me still hearing it, almost like she was fine-tuning a sonar system. That was a bit too complicated for me, so instead, I simply walked over to the counter where I could finally see her sitting in a chair. She looked up at me. What were you doing outside at such a late hour? I went for a walk, but ended up getting lost. Lily's expression clouded over. Not many people come to our mountains, which made the area a relatively popular suicide spot. Really? As you can see, we don't have that many guests at this inn. Usually only 2 or 3, even during the high season, and most of them are our regulars. It's rare to have even a single guest during the off-season. I was fine, though. That I can see. As I imagined what Lily could be thinking about here at nights, she continued. I've been working here for a long time. I've seen many guests that come back and many that didn't. What kind of guests didn't come back? Some we found, others we didn't, Lily said with a sigh. I remembered the mountain I saw from the mansion's window. It was covered with trees from top to bottom. You couldn't even make out the roads. It could have been easy to find a person it couldn't have been easy to find a person in there. Can I tell you something odd? Sure. In retrospect, all those guests had a peculiar air that separated them from the rest. Well, I imagine they'd come off as different compared to regular tourists. I suppose so, but I didn't think it's that simple. It was just their personality or a few individual, or it wasn't just their personality or a few individual quirks. When I saw them, the difference I'd feel was about as large and obvious as the sudden change of color or shape on an object. And how do I look to you? I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I noticed that you have that same kind of air about you. Although, there's something unusual about it in your case. When I first saw you, I only felt that way about half of you. Well, long story short, I was worried for you too, though maybe in a slightly different way from Nanai. Perhaps what she was saying was the truth. I grew curious about her method of sensing these things, but it probably wasn't something that could be explained overnight. Your face is all red, Lily suddenly said. I touched my cheek, feeling it cold as ice. I might have been warmly dressed, but I did spend most of the night outside. A fairly natural consequence, but being so deep in thought I didn't notice it at all. I think you should take a shower before going to bed. Do you want me to heat up the bath? No, I'll be fine. I waved my hand in denial while she made a troubled expression. Then can I at least make you something warm to drink? I'd love that. I felt like I'd make her worry even more if I refused, so I had her deliver the drink to my room. But that is all the time that I have for this episode, guys. So, if you liked it, please give it a big thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already, subscribe. By subscribing, you're becoming part of a legacy. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!